Reawaken by G McMillan. It seemed a great distance, as a man can look at the moon and think of the many miles between him and it, or how a seaman can look at the water in all directions without land in sight. But the distance between items is not as important as the draw between them. A man can think his past is years away, but in his mind a memory is a fraction of a second away. The distance was merely an illusion. That time could be traveled backwards was a matter of physical states, not that of mental states. And here, now, the memory from years before had jumped across time to bring back the thing he had long since forgotten. Kindness. It had been so long since someone had been kind to him. The years of being in a wheelchair, unable to speak without tremendous effort, was not the burden it had been a minute ago. A simple act of another reaching out to help him brought back the memories of when she had been alive. She had been so kind to him, so patient and caring. Maybe not all the time, but often. 6 years she had been gone. 6 years of struggle and pain. 6 years of loneliness and decay. The man in the wheelchair turned his head up and smiled at the young woman standing beside him. He was grateful, and even though it was almost too much effort to speak, his smile said more than any words he was capable of mumbling. How had he forgotten? Had so much happened in 6 years that he had forgotten what kindness was? It appeared to be so, and as sad as it seemed, it had been up to him to create that distance. Now he was as close to her as he had been years ago when she had still been by his side. A warmth filled him. It was soothing and refreshing. It flooded into his aching muscles and bones. Tissue that had been tense with fear, distrust, and loathing was now given a respite. The body of the housekeeper was still in sight across the room. When the man in the wheelchair let his gaze linger on it, some of the warmth left him. But he remembered the way the housekeeper treated him, how she would hit him with books and twist his joints until he cried out. The young woman standing beside him put her hand on his shoulder and smiled. He could tell she was disturbed at the sight of the corpse. But the young woman was also determined and kind. She knew that he had suffered at her hands. He could see it in her eyes under a dark hat and above a silver badge. There was movement around them, but in that moment, the man in the wheelchair was only present with the young woman and the dead body across the room. A young woman was asking him something. A man behind the young woman was asking him something, but the young woman was explaining that he could not respond. They became distant as he glanced back at the dead housekeeper. All that hate, rage, and fear she had driven into him. It surprised him when he realized that he could hurt her with his thoughts. At first, anyway. The man in the wheelchair smiled. He was free now. They could take him away, maybe to prison, maybe a retirement home. It didn't matter. He was happy. There were kind people in the world. One had just reached out to him. He was sorry it had been after the murder he had committed, but he felt justified. He looked back at the young woman beside him. She was bending down to say something. He could smell her. It was wonderful.